he has taken anatomy and physiology. Anybody else in here have anatomy and physiology courses? Juan has to?
This high school?
Sure. Okay, so a little bit of knowledge on this stuff, cool. This week in lab, we're going to be looking at tissue, so that'll kind of build into the anatomy and physiology part, and then next week, fingers crossed, we'll be dissecting fetal pigs. We found out the mystery of the company because they didn't have one item, failed to ship everything. So that's why we were a little short on stuff last time, but we called and yelled at the company and said, ship what you got. So hopefully we'll be getting all this stuff in within the next week. Physical requirements: limited size and shape. Flying animals, hydrodynamics, limited shapes possible for fast-swimming aquatic animals. So, as you look at organisms, they are specifically designed to move about as efficiently as possible in their environments. What we call the body design that seems to work really well for both flying and swimming organisms is fusiform. Body design which is taken with both the interior and posterior ends. So we look at the dolphins here. They're kind of thick in the middle, and yet they taper to the beak and the tail. And that's how we see a lot of birds, a lot of fish, a lot of flying swimming organisms have this body design. And it seems to be the most efficient to move through the air or the water. And we'll talk about moving through different environments as we get into anatomy and physiology. So, the idea of physical requirements limiting size and shape of flying animals, this is why elephants will never be able to fly. Which is a good thing. You can imagine the mess they make after you wash your car. Not good. Uniform body design which is taken for both interior and posterior ends. Considering animal size and shape at the cellular level, cells must be bathed in an aqueous solution. Most cells, almost all cells. They have to live in an aquatic environment. This is one of the trade-offs we made once we decided to become terrestrial, once we moved out of the oceans. If you live in the ocean, you live in any body of water, you're not surrounded by water, you have water. What we did, opposite to this, is we kind of trap that internal environment inside. So we're going to keep aquatic on the inside because all of our cells are bathed in an aqueous solution. Diffusion occurs within the environment. So if you're small enough to live in the ocean, lake, pond, stream, river, creek, whatever, let's say you're a platinum like the planarians that we saw last week, diffusion works very nicely. If you're small enough, flat enough, thin enough, those things just diffuse out of the bottom of your environment. Surface area to volume ratio is constrained to maintain the cell's ability to survive. In bigger organisms, they don't have bigger cells, they just have more of them. And this is because there's an upper limit to how much you can stretch the cell membrane around the contents of the cell. It's like taking a garbage bag. You can only put so much garbage in there. And if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually the bag is going to burst, the garbage is going to end up all over the floor. Well, same thing with cells. If you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, cytoplasm of organelles inside that cell, making them bigger and bigger, eventually the cell membrane is going to burst. So there's an upper limit as to how big cells can get. This applies to unicellular as well as multicellular organisms. Like I said, bigger organisms don't have bigger cells. The cell of the blue whale is no bigger than the cell of a puppy. Okay? It's just that they have a lot more of the cells. Just stay in the water as unicellular organisms. Well, that's called evolution. Evolution drives us to complexity, from the simple to the more complex form. So, when you get to be a complex body form, you have to come up with different ways to cope with being a complex body contents. First of all, you need a protective outer covering. We've got our skin. Some animals like the snake, fish, other reptiles have scales. There's other things that we have that we use to compensate for all this. Large muscles enable rapid movement. I bet even those of you that might be in the worst of shape can outrun an amoeba. And I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm pretty confident most of you can outrun an amoeba. We're bigger, cover more ground we can than faster. Internal digestion allows gradual breakdown of food, controlled release of energy. Our digestive system is set up. It's not just one straight chute. That's why the intestines are so convoluted, twisting back and forth. Why we have a stomach before, to help break down all the material we take in and timely release. Remember we talked about the shark? How it has spiral valves inside the digestive system to help slow down food so it absorbs more nutrients. So this is that time release. We don't want to have everything pushed straight through, so we're always hungry, always having to eat. If we slow digestion down, we can absorb more nutrients that way. Organ systems maintain a relatively stable internal environment within the variable external environment. It's called homeostasis, where we maintain a steady state. And the organ, whether you're cold-blooded or warm-blooded, helps maintain a certain type of environment inside. Not just to help maintain body temperature, which warm-blooded are better than cold-blooded, but to help maintain the general overall function of a living organism. Yeah.
There's just something about the breakdown of food has something to do with intestines.
Longer intestines usually require longer digestion before we're going to get
Why is it that herbivores even have longer intestines?
because the food they eat is very nutrient poor. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. That's because most of them feed on things like grasses and leaves and stuff like that. They don't get a lot of nutritional value out of it, so they need to hang on to it longer. Yeah, a little bit more.
Is it that they have the most amount of energy though? Plants, it's like they're called carriers. Plants first because they want to
Well, we're right down here at the top of the rock.
the bottom of it.
How wide is the bottom?
Because they want to eat.
No, it's because you have to get a lot of them. That's why you get so much energy out of them. Because the individual plant is not really nutrient rich, but if you eat a lot of them. I mean, think about most herbivores. They spend all day grazing, eating, and everything, because what they eat is very nutrient poor, so they have to eat a lot of it, and they have to hang on to it longer to get that little bit of nutrition out. Makes sense?
Yeah, but it doesn't get rid of most molecules.
Only by volume, not by individual plants. Plants are relatively nutrient poor. Now, if you take things into account like fruits and vegetables, even products, we're going to have more energy than we'll use with grasses. So it's just okay. Any questions about this? Everybody okay with snakes? I'm not going to bring one into class, don't worry. The pictures are okay? Because I had a student once who told me that pictures even freak him out. And I tried to warn people about that and I forgot once, and a big picture of a snake came up. Man, you could hear that student scream all over the class. It was fun. Okay, tissue structure and function. Tissue is a group of cells with a common structure and function. And there's 4 main categories of tissues, but don't write that down because that's going to be the next topic, each individual category. So tissues are groups of cells with a common structure and function. 4 main categories of tissues. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And this is the stuff we're going to be looking at in lab this week. This is a picture of hyaline cartilage magnified about 400 times. You've got a specific type of cell, chondrocytes, which are the cartilaginous cells. But you see, it's not just chondrocytes. You've got them embedded in all this light blue stuff, and that's the matrix. It's a non-cellular or acellular material. It kind of holds everything together, yet keeps them apart. And you're thinking, what? What it does is it holds them in a general specific area, but they're not packed down on top of each other. And we'll talk about different types of matrices. For cartilage, it's a semi-solid gel-like matrix. For bone, it's a hard matrix. It keeps the bone cells inside the bone. For blood, it's a liquid matrix we call plasma. It keeps the blood cells flowing through the vessel. It keeps them together, yet they're not packed in on top of each other. So, the tissues, groups of cells with common structure and function. First up is epithelial tissue. Here are the sheets of tightly packed cells. There's no matrix around epithelial tissues. You just have these cells. And they almost look like shingles on a roof, as they are layered on your body surface. And that's kind of like the idea. Now, this is also an exception. Not only does it not have a matrix, but they're not bathed in a watery solution, at least not on the surface, bathed in aqueous solution. Covered body exterior lines organs and cavities of body interior. So if you think about it like this, the entire outer surface of your body is covered with epithelial tissue. You open your mouth and let that tissue in. It's going to go in your mouth, down your esophagus, the lining of the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, so on, all the way through the interior cavities of your body as well. So it lines the outside and inside of your body. It's a barrier against injury, pathogens, and fluid loss. And I believe we talked about your immune system later. As long as your skin's intact, it keeps out most stuff. Okay? That's when you get cuts in your skin or break in the skin that causes infections to occur. Glandular epithelial absorb or secrete chemical solutions throughout the epithelial tissue. You've got glands, you've got sweat glands, you've got sebaceous glands, you've got glands that help you cool yourself down, you've got glands that help you to keep your hair nice and shiny for other reasons than just appearance. As far as epithelial tissue goes, the shape varies. This is just a skin cell. This is actually called simple squamous epithelium. Okay? Simple because on the surface it's just this one thin layer of cell. Squamous because it's flat. Now if we look at the entire layer of skin, it's actually more complex than that. Because the ones on the surface have actually died before they get there. So you're basically covered in dead tissue. Your hair growing out, dead tissue. Okay? It's amazing how much time and effort some of you put into your hair. And it's just dead tissue. I don't have that issue. Okay. What happens? As the skin moves to the surface, all the things that made the skin cells alive are taken out and replaced with protein. And that makes it waterproof. And so it really becomes basically a waterproof shingle on the outer surface of your body to help protect you, not just against water, but against other things. Waterproof to keep excess water out, also to keep all the moisture in. As far as the shapes of epithelial tissue goes, like I said, squamous is flat, cuboidal is cube-shaped or square, and columnar is rectangular. And we're going to look at examples of all these in lab this week. So I will point these out to you. Like I said, squamous, flat on the surface of the skin, also lining other cavities in the body. We'll see some of that. Cuboidal is square. Cuboidal is often found lining vessels. You usually see it in a ring pattern like this. And that's how we'll find it. Columnar is rectangular. A good place for this is in the small intestine. Those cells line the entire length of the small intestine. Yes, Justin.
When it comes to like words of squamous and squamous cell carcinoma, is it the same kind of, do we mean the same thing? Or is it
Like say that again, what type of specific cancer?
squamous cell carcinoma?
What that's talking about is a cancerous
That's flat.
on the flat cells, yes. Yes. Squamous is flat, cuboidal, cube-shaped is square, columnar, like a column, is rectangular. A couple other terms when they talk about simple squamous, simple columnar, you're talking about a single layer of cells. When you get into stratified, you're talking about multiple layers. And the name of the stratified, like this right here, is stratified squamous epithelium. You always go with the top layer inside of the name. Stratified squamous, which is the cells on top. You could have cuboidal, you could have columnar down below, but it's what you see on the top that you use to name the cells. And like I said, again, we'll see all this in lab on Friday. Next up is connective tissue. Connective tissue binds and supports other tissues. Invertebrates see here, you'll find almost all these tissues in one place. I want to say I took these diagrams for that protection, so we have one of those. Muscle tissue is the most abundant tissue in animals. If you take everybody's tissue and break them down into their individual components and weigh them, muscles can weigh more than everything else. It counts for most of the energy consuming cellular work. Muscle tissue tend to have a lot more components to the cells. For instance, they might have multiple nuclei. They also have many, many more mitochondria. This includes skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Three different muscle types. Skeletal you find around the skeleton, cardiac in the heart, smooth in organs and vessels. And in lab, we'll look at 3 different muscle types. I'll show you how to distinguish between them. And on the lab exam at the end of the semester, you'll have to tell me which is which. But it's not too difficult. Yes.
Extra mitochondria serve a purpose by providing extra energy. Why would they have multiple nuclei?
Either it's because there's no distinct separation of the cells into individual cells, or because some of the movement is so complex, they just divide the liver between multiple nuclei instead of one nucleus trying to do that. But you're right about mitochondria. Nervous tissue, since the stimuli transmit signals in the form of nerve impulses throughout an animal, concentrated in the brain coordinates many activities. Light bulb you heard out. You have to change it. Now I'm taking that, wait a second, that was on just a second ago. That's going to be really hot. I should wait for it to cool down. So as soon as you touch the hot light bulb, you've got sensory neurons in your hand that tell you, ow, this is hot. It sends a signal to the brain. The brain's sitting there contemplating the information just received, comparing it to past events. Okay, the idiot did it last month when another light bulb burned out. The person just does not learn. Okay, let's try and do the same thing a little bit faster this time. Pull back. So it sends a signal from the brain back into the arm of the hand saying, pull back, pull back, pull back. Think about this. Anytime that's ever happened to you, you're usually pulling back even before you think, ow, that's hot. Because your nervous system works in fractions of a second. So before you think, ow, that's hot, you've already pulled your hand back away from the source of the pain. Yes?
You know the proximate in this, the fire.
No, I'll talk about that. So, concentrated in the brain that goes down the spinal cord, and it has nerves that extend to every part of your body, all the way to your fingertips and toes. Yes,
Are they, are the nerve cells really long
somewhere.
and not too long?
Like you have one that extends from the base of your spine all the way down to your toe. So in some people, that one cell can be almost literally.
And that's the one that gets pinched and when it's done. Is that a different, it's just that different?
Well, that's one of them. There's many that extend through. The nerves tend to branch and have these extensions. We'll talk more about that when we finish.
They don't go back?
Not much, no. You have sciatica, and you're thinking of slicing their nerve. Okay, so I can't feel if I stub my toe, but at least I won't have sciatic. If you want to delve into this more, tissues figures 40.5, page 56 to 8. Okay, so we talked about tissues. Tissues are a collection of cells with a singular specialized function. You start putting tissues together, now you develop organs. So organs are structures in which different tissues are organized for a singular function. Animals' bodies are divided into two major regions, the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. The thoracic cavity is the chest, the cardiovascular is all located, the abdominal is the digestive. Now, those are the two major regions. You've also got cavities in the pelvic area, the vertebra, and the cranium. So there's minor cavities, and the thoracic cavity has a pericardial cavity, which is specifically where the heart is located. So, but the two major, by major we mean biggest cavities in the body, the thoracic for the chest, and the abdominal where you have most of your organs of digestion. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this to you before, to talk about how tissues and organs kind of work together. What's the function of the pancreas? No? Yes. I think we've had that conversation before, but you said the same thing last time. At least you're consistent. I love it. It's great. You're always so consistent. Okay, secretes insulin. What else does the pancreas do?
Regulate sugars.
Well, that's what the insulin does. It secretes buffers to help neutralize the acids coming out of the stomach going into the small intestine. So that's two different functions, two different cell types carrying out two different functions. And it's only one order. So that's where we see tissues specializing in doing specific things, one to balance the sugar, one to neutralize the acid in the digestive system, coming together in a singular organ. Organ systems, series of organs working together to conduct major body functions. Efforts of all systems are coordinated. See if I can get one. We've got the muscular, the skeletal, the nervous, that's the endocrine, the cardiovascular system, the lymphatic system, respiratory, digestive, excretory, and reproductive gut. And all systems are identical between males and females with one exception, and that's the reproductive system. Other than that, they're all pretty generally the same throughout evolution. So efforts of all systems are coordinated. If you think about it, thinking one thing, eating. Look at everything that's involved in eating. You've got the muscular system, the nervous system, your hormones are released, like insulin. The cardiovascular system is there to take the nutrients from the digestive system, carry it to all parts of the body. The digestive system, obviously, and the weights they build up, the excretory system comes into play as well. So one system can't function without all the others. And conversely, if one system breaks down, then it could result in the entire organism breaking down. So all these systems have to work together, they're all integral. Internal environment regulation. A regulator is an animal that uses internal control mechanisms to moderate internal changes due to external fluctuations. Fish maintaining sodium concentration. Get a sockeye salmon here. I like picking the salmon for this salmon. Where's the salmon born?
The river.
I'm glad you said freshwater. Water. No, you did right. Freshwater river. Where do they live most of their lives?
The sea.
In the sea, in the ocean. So they have to go from freshwater to salt. Where do they die?
The river.
In the river, back to the fresh water again. That's why they swim upstream, so they can lay their eggs where they were born. Females release eggs, males release sperm, and that's it, they're pretty much gone. fresh. That's a lot of regulation. But they can do it. We do that on a minor scale. Always have to regulate a specific salt concentration in our body based on how much fresh water we have. So think about it. You're out hiking in the woods and you forgot to take water. It's a day like today or even hotter. And you dehydrate. So they send the chopper, the ambulance out there to bring you back to the hospital. So what do? They take water and stick it right in your veins. What's in there? Saline. A little bit of salt solution. You're thinking, are they crazy? I'm thirsty. I don't need more salt. I need more water. But see, your entire body has a slight saline concentration. But if you put fresh water in your bloodstream, you would destroy all your red blood cells. So you put a little bit of saline concentration to help maintain all this. It's part of you being a regulator. A conformer. Animal that allows internal conditions to vary with external fluctuations. For instance, a crab conforming to solute concentrations. If it's 3% saline outside, I'll be 3% saline inside. Done. I don't have to worry about trying to regulate everything. I'm just going to go with the flow. The regulator maintains a specific environment inside its body regardless of what's going on outside its body. Conformer, whatever it is outside, that's what's doing inside. It's good. It's a nice perception. It's very good. All of biology is like that. Fitness is when we get down to the last bit of the fitness game. Ecology. I like to call ecology science light because all those terms make sense. Mentioned earlier, homeostasis, maintaining a steady state of internal balance. Regulates chemical and physical properties. For instance, your body temperature is always going to be around 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6. Your blood pH is always going to be around 7.4. You can't really go much down below that or above that. 7.3 to 7.5, yeah, maybe not much more. But you've got enough buffers in your blood that you can take a hit of almost pure acid in your bloodstream and it will neutralize it. So that's one of your least concerns. Blood glucose, about 90 milligrams per 100 mils. I like looking at things like polar bears and penguins when we talk about this because that is one of the harshest environments for a mammal or a bird to survive. And trying to maintain things like body temperature. I mean, if we were thrown into the ocean like this, where he is right now, we might last 5 minutes and we'd go hypothermic and die. Polar bears are technically classified as a marine mammal. So they do very well in there. Thank you very much. Besides having blubber insulating their bodies, their skin is not white, it's actually black. So it helps to absorb the sunlight. It's like on a cool day you wear dark clothes to help absorb sunlight and warm you up. Its fur is not actually white, it's actually clear. They're hollow little straws that allow the sunlight to pass through, but then trap the heat and help to keep it warm. So it's very well designed for living in this environment in order for it to control homeostasis. Now, if you're thinking ahead, I won't ask you the specifics about this. I just want you to understand what homeostasis is. Okay, let's start with temperature of 36 to 38 degrees Celsius. We talked about 37, 98.6. Those are just averages. Most people are a little bit higher, a little bit lower than those averages. Let's say we increase body temperature. There's a thermostat in the hypothalamus, part of your brain, that activates the cooling mechanism. Sweat glands secrete sweat, which evaporates, cooling the body. So you get this moisture over your skin that draws the heat away from you, and then you feel cool breezes against it and helps to cool you down. Blood vessels in the skin dilate, capillaries fill, heat radiates from the skin. So what's happening is this is why on hot days people get flushed or a little bit pink or reddish. Because blood vessels are dilating, carrying blood from the core of the body to the surface to cool it down, and then to pump the cooler blood back into the body. Then body temperature decreases, the thermostat shuts off the cooling mechanism. So yeah, it's kind of like the thermostat in your house. If it gets too hot, the AC kicks on. If it gets too cold, the heater kicks on. Okay, decreased body temperature. Thermostat hypothalamus activates warming mechanism. Just the opposite happens with the blood vessels. They constrict, reducing heat loss. Skeletal muscles contract, shivering generates heat. Body temperature increases, thermostat shuts off warming mechanism. We'll get back to this. So part of that homeostasis is ways to keep your body temperature right around this, whether it's cooling you down or heating you up. Okay, touched on this earlier. Homeostatic control systems have three functional components. First is the receptor, detects changes in the internal environment. These could be receptors in and around your heart, in your blood vessels, in your organs. Control center processes info from the receptors, evaluates and directs an appropriate response.
Homeostatic control systems have three function components. Receptors detects changes in internal environment. A control center processes the information from the receptor. Evaluates and directs the appropriate response. Effectors carries out the appropriate response. So, as Professor Rustick talked about before, with the light bulb, that's why he has the light bulb right here. When the receptor detects the change in the internal environment, you grab the hot light bulb. The control center processes the information from the receptor and evaluates the appropriate response. The effector carries out the response. So as I grab the hot light bulb, the receptor feels and collects information, which goes to the control center. The control center says, "This is hot, please let go." The effector carries out that action of me letting go. Negative feedback loop. Changes in a part of an internal environment that triggers control mechanisms to counteract further changes in the same direction. Alright. But pretty much what he talked about here is every time that something is carried out, right here, it's going to stop. So body temperature. So your body temperature has a negative feedback loop because if it gets too high or too low, it goes back to homeostasis. So mechanisms happen which trigger to get you back to the normal. If you're getting too hot, say you're getting a fever or something like that, your body tries to compensate for that by doing things in the body to stop that action from happening, just like if you're getting too cold. You can see right here that receptors in the body pretty much feel that your temperature is getting a little too hot for your brain and skin. The information is sent along the control pathway to the center. The control center, thermoregulator of cells and brain. Okay, the information sent along the different pathways to the effector. So here we see the effectors carrying it out. You were too hot. You start to sweat. Your body's cooled down. Now let's see the other end when you get real cold. So body temperature falls. Receptors, the temperature sensitive cells in the brain and skin, that they detect that. So those are your receptors. They detect that kind of thing. They send that information to the control center. The control center says it analyzes that information. It's kind of like the middleman, and it finds the right person to do the job. It contacts the effector. The effector is the skeletal muscle. What does the skeletal muscle do? It starts to shiver. Why does it shiver? Because it's warming your body up. And there we go. Next one. Positive feedback loop. Alright, positive feedback loop. Changes in part of internal environments that trigger control mechanisms to further amplify changes in the same direction. Blood clotting. Alright, here we go. Number 1, breaking or tearing occurs in the blood vessels. A positive feedback loop cycle is initiated, as we can see right here. So we got a tear in our follicle right here. Now what happens with our positive feedback loop? Okay, boom. Platelets adhere to the site and release chemicals. Here's our platelets. They're kind of like our little healers and stuff like that. They're gonna plug the hole in the pipe that's broken. And there we go. We can see that the hole is getting plugged. The feedback cycle ends when the plug is formed. Platelets plug is formed. There we go, right there. The release chemicals. Release chemicals are attracted. They attract more platelets. That way, it's able to heal faster, kind of like a scar, if you will. That way, new tissue can be made eventually. Thermoregulators, the process by which animals maintain an internal temperature within a tolerable range. Biochemical, physiological processes are temperature sensitive. Enzymes, optimal range dependent on species. So here you see the polar bear. He has lots of mechanisms to keep him thermoregulated, just as the camel. In this case, the polar bear, he's got his skin, which is clear. He's actually got black skin to absorb the sun and absorb heat. And he's got lots of blubber on, so that he can maintain that heat. The camel is the other way around. He's in the hot desert all the time. So what does he do? He regulates himself through water consumption, which is found in the hump right there. So both of these are thermoregulators. Ectoderms, organisms by which body temperatures are dependent upon external sources, aka cold-blooded pecliotherms. Low-energy strategy that limits activity over a wide range of environment temperatures. Example, fish, amphibians, or reptiles. So, this guy right here, he is dependent on the temperatures around him. So sometimes he'll crawl on a rock, sometimes he won't. It's dependent.
Dependent upon external sources, also known as cold-blooded pecliotherms. You can idea what we're talking about. Hopefully you guys understand if we're talking cold-blooded. It's not like you pick them up and they're ice cold. It just means on a cooler day, yes, they will be cold to the touch. On a warmer day, they're going to be warmer to the touch. They can't regulate their body temperature. If you're a lizard and you go outside and it's 45 degrees outside, your body temperature is going to be 45 degrees unless you come up with a way to warm yourself up. Lying in the sun or on a hot rock, changing the scales to be a little bit darker so you can do that to absorb more heat. If it's a hot day, it's 115 degrees outside, you're going to be 115 degrees unless you change your scales lighter, stay in the shade, or maybe just put your schedule, sleep all day, go out at night, and it will be cooler. Low energy strategy limits activity over a wide range of environmental temperatures. These are fish, amphibians, and reptiles. You can throw in all the invertebrates too. The only warm-blooded animals on the planet are birds and mammals. And that's the end of those. Organisms whose body temperatures are maintained within a very narrow range by metabolism. Also known as warm-blooded or homeotherms. Warm blood is a little bit more applicable here because we all maintain pretty much a warm body temperature, birds and mammals. Also known as homeotherms. High energy strategy allows activity over a wide range of environmental temperatures. And these are birds and mammals. Sometimes I refer to them as homeotherms, poikilotherms. I don't use cold-blooded or warm-blooded, but if you want to use that to help you to remember, that's fine. Just like the temperature, realize that being warm-blooded takes a lot of energy to maintain that. Being cold-blooded, not so much. Trying to find ways that are low in metabolic activity to maintain temperature. Whereas with warm-blooded, endotherms, homeotherms, it takes a lot to maintain that. AKA also known as tissue. Yeah, see here. Okay, why endothermic? Why are we warm-blooded? Why don't we just be cold-blooded? It costs so much less energy. You can just lay around all the time, not worry about anything. Generates large amounts of heat. Well, if you have higher activity levels, you're more metabolically active, that's a good thing. Because you wake up in the morning, you're basically ready to go. You don't have to crawl outside, find a nice hot rock to lay on as the sun comes up, and warm yourself up enough that you finally have enough energy to go do stuff. Compensates for thermal instability. And we're talking about this mainly in terrestrial organisms. Water changes temperature, but not as quickly as land does. You guys live in the desert, you know it's nothing for the daytime highs and nighttime lows to be about 30 degrees. It will change that rapidly over a 24-hour period. If you're warm-blooded, homeothermic, endothermic, then your body, being constant body temperature, has no problem with dealing with that. But because temperatures on land change more quickly, if you are not endothermic, if you're ectothermic, then you have to come up with strategies to cope with that rapid temperature change. Now in the middle of the summer, July, August, well, it doesn't change all that much from the daytime highs to the nighttime lows. But this time of the year, it's nothing for it to be about 30 degrees. Balancing heat loss and gain between an organism and its environment. How do you do it? How do you keep warm if you're not a warm-blooded organism? Well, there's conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. The next slide will show you what all these mean. So write these terms down, and then you can write in what they mean on the next slide. Conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. Okay, conduction, lower right-hand corner. Absorbing heat by sitting on a hot rock. Your rock could be any flat surface, but I'm rolling with the picture. And the diagram's not too far off from this one. convection, lower left-hand corner, losing heat by air moving across the skin. So you're getting warmth from the rock because it's been sitting in the sun all day. Climb up on this rock, the rock. Convection, let's say there's a cool breeze blowing about. What it'll do is it'll take the heat and move it across the skin, pulling it away from the organism. Radiation is absorbing heat by sitting in the sun. So not only are you getting heat from below, but from above as well. And evaporation, losing heat through moist surfaces. Well, we sweat. And so we put moisture on our skin, and that takes the heat out of our bodies. What if you're something that doesn't sweat, like a dog or a cat? Where's your moist surfaces? Where's dogs and moist surfaces? Where? Now, that's why they can't. That's their moist surface. What about a cat? Where's a cat pee? Not as often. Their mouths are small compared to ever seen a cat lick its skin? Still lick its skin, putting moisture on the surface, artificially sweating. If you're something like this lizard, where's your moist surface going to be? And around the face, right? Maybe it has special glands that secrete moisture on the surface of the skin around the eyes. Maybe its mouth will be a moist surface and it'll open its mouth and allow heat to evaporate through there. Different animals use different strategies, but basically conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. Got it? When hot, most animals seek cooler places, and when cold, seek warmer places. These are behavioral responses. So far, behavioral responses. When you go back to the idea of sweating, dilating blood vessels, or shivering and constricting blood vessels. These are physiological responses. But if you've got a method, something that works for you, on a hot day you crawl on a rock, on a cold day you crawl under the rock, other way around. On a hot day you crawl under the rock, on a cold day you crawl on top of the rock. Whatever it takes to warm yourself and cool yourself down, that's a behavior response. Most animals have cooler places, and cold seek warmer places. Again, behavioral responses. We talk about dilating blood vessels, constricting blood vessels. We talk about sweating, physiological responses. Things that our body does really without our approval. Just do it. Hey, sweating cools me down, I'm okay with it. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't want to sweat. Maybe you're on a date, or you're in someplace fancy, and you start to sweat. You can't stop yourself from sweating, right? It's your body doing its own thing. Insulation against cold. Well, some animals have more fur than we do. They live in cold regions that don't deal with it. Birds have feathers. Now you're thinking, okay, use them to fly, right? Well, you've seen birds on cold days, they kind of puff themselves up like these little guys here. And what they're doing is they're trapping body heat in that. And it's like putting on down comforter to them. And it helps to keep them warm. In aquatic mammals, blubber. You have an extra thick layer of lipids in your body just below the skin. That helps to insulate you, helps to keep you warm. So fur with mammals, feathers with birds, blubber in aquatic mammals. Touched on this already, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. When you dilate something, think about your pupils. Pupils dilate, they get bigger or smaller. Bigger. When you dilate something, you make it bigger. Constrict, you make it smaller, tighter. So you have to remember, vasodilation is an increase in diameter of superficial blood vessels resulting in increased blood flow to the skin. We're not talking about the aorta. or the superior vena cava getting bigger. Okay, we're talking about the blood vessels closest to your skin. You have lots of them. And what they do is when it gets hot outside, they will increase in diameter. And again, this is why your skin looks a little flushed or pink or a little reddish, especially if you've been exerting yourself, working, running, doing something outside, especially when it gets hotter out. And so you have this appearance, and it's because you've got blood flowing to the surface of your skin, because that's where it's going to get cooler the fastest. And then once it cools a little bit, it's going to be pumped back into the body, cooling the body down, especially the core, where it's going to be the hottest. So vasodilation, vaso refers to vessels, dilation means vessels get bigger. Vasoconstriction is just the opposite. Decrease the diameter of superficial blood vessels, resulting in decreased blood flow to the skin. If it's cold outside, your skin's going to turn maybe a little bit blue. Because what's happening is the blood's being drawn away from your skin, away from the surface of your body, especially in the extremities, and pumped back to the core to try and keep you warm here. If your blood gets cool on the outside, it's pumped back to the core, it's going to cool the core down. So you restrict the amount of blood flow to the body surface, especially.
Does cools the body now?
Not vasoconstriction.
But it goes back to the core.
Right, it keeps the blood away from the surface, closer to the core, where it's going to stay warm. Because the surface, if you get cold, and then it pumps it back to the core, then it's right. That's why you want to constrict the blood vessel, limiting blood flow to the surfaces, especially the extremities. And that's what you're thinking, because it kind of sounds like, oh, you said for the surface to cool down to back to the core to cool it. If it's cold outside, you want to keep it from blowing to the surface first, and then going back to the core. That makes sense? So again, vaso refers to vasoconstriction, makes the vessel smaller in diameter. Counter-current heat exchange. Seems like I asked questions about this. It's not a hard concept, but people seem to struggle with it a little bit. Arrangement of blood vessels that traps heat in the body core reduces heat loss and extremities in the third. I'm going to give you a couple more examples here. Okay? Basically what it's saying is, as blood flow goes out of the body, it's going to warm the blood flow coming back into the body. That's that counter current. Okay, counter current. It's going to flow against the current. So as that current goes through blood vessels out of the main core of the body into the extremities, it's going to warm the blood coming back into the body, because these blood vessels are going to be very close to each other. And so it's like the blood warming itself back up before it comes back into the body. So as the blood flows out, and it gets out in the extremities, it's going to cool down. But as it comes back in, it's going to warm up, because these blood vessels being right next to each other, the warm blood going out is going to warm the cool blood coming in, so it doesn't become a shock to your body. And here's another diagram. Heat from the artery is going to warm up the cold blood in the veins. You guys know arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood back to the heart, right? We all good with that? So as the artery leaves the body, leaving the heart, it's going to be warmer, and it's going to warm the blood coming back in. So it's not quite that shock. So counter current heat exchange. So you've got two different currents flowing out and in. Counter current, the heat exchange goes from the artery into the vein, warming the blood up before it enters the body. That makes sense to everybody. Any questions? So we see it in birds, like we showed before, and right here, as the artery flows out, you see the body temperature is 35, 30, 20, 10 drops as it goes out. But as it comes back in, it's not quite as warm as it's coming out, but it gets a lot warmer. It's not like 9-degree blood flowing back into the body. So the same thing in the fin of a dolphin. As the blood flows out, it's just blood flows out of the artery, it's going to warm the blood as they come back in through the veins. Counter-current. What?
Like warming by
not so much contact, but it's the two arteries, the artery and vein are close together, two vessels are close together, and the blood flows down this one. The heat is just gonna radiate from this over to this one, and warm this up as it comes back in.
I guess that's what I meant on my comment.
The blood vessels will be able to direct contact with each other. Yes. It's close enough that they can warm each other up. Okay. Evaporative cooling. You might have swamp coolers in your house around here. If you look down in this area, not so much. If you start moving out of the valley, a lot of people might have them. Basically what it is pumping water into a system where a breeze blows across it, cooling the house down that way. Okay, so it's not using your AC, you use a little bit less energy. Same principle, the reason why you should help cool something down. Panting for birds and mammals. Birds do it too. On really hot days, you see birds. Most birds are intelligent enough to stay out of the sun. It's funny as you drive out and you've got all these trees here, you see the birds standing in the shade of the trees, especially the grackles and the blackbirds. Sweating, we do that. Bathing, like these elephants, they have a nice mud bath. They're in there, they're putting mud on their surface, they get some moisture, it draws the heat from their bodies, releases it, and extra bonus, serves as a nice sunscreen for them too. Helps keep getting sunburned. And then licking, cats do this. They'll sit and they'll lick, and that's like putting sweat on the skin where they don't sweat. They put the saliva there, and it has the same effect as sweat, helps to cool them down. A couple other things we can do. Shivering, increased muscle activity generates heat. Increased muscle activity generates heat. Non-shivering thermogenesis. Thermo refers to temperature, genesis means to create, so we're going to create temperature here. We're going to create heat. How? By generating heat using mitochondria instead of producing ATP. You know what spontaneous combustion is, right? You're sitting there, well, no, just seems like if you're going to the grocery store and look at those magazines on the way out, it happens all the time. But there's never been a documented case of somebody spontaneously combusting. So scientists get bored sometimes they sit around thinking, okay, if somebody were to spontaneously combust, how could it happen? And the idea is you get the mitochondria. Some cells have tens of thousands of mitochondria, all in overdrive that generate all this heat, and the person just pushes the plant. Well, it's not like going to burn the house. I'm just saying some of the person like the water to turn into steam and you cannot. You like put out your own fire, is what you're saying. Alright. Okay, so what it's saying is, instead of producing energy, you make those mitochondria produce heat, which if you go along with that idea of theory of spontaneous combustion, that kind of makes sense. Okay, so instead of converting ATP or sugars, nutrients into ATP, we're going to convert them into heat. So we're just going to stoke the fire and warm it up. Non-shivering thermogenesis. I know it's a stretch, but the word kind of defines itself once you break it down and understand the ways. Non-shivering thermogenesis. I just like that picture that fell off. It just looks beautiful. It makes me want to shiver. Yeah. Okay, bioenergetics. Flow of energy through an animal. Determines food requirements, behavior, growth, and reproduction. So pretty much energy supports all these things, food requirements. If you are very active, you're going to need a lot of nutrients to maintain your level of activity. Sit around all the time, not so much. Behavior. Well, if you have a lot of food, a lot of energy, you might be more active. Growth. We know that you need a certain amount of nutrients to get from this size to this size. Different animals have different energy requirements. And if they don't get those energy requirements, then it could adversely affect the development of that organism, whether it's a human or another animal. And then reproduction. It takes a lot of energy, depending upon the species, some energy more than others. It's all based on how much energy the organism receives through bioenergetics that determines food requirements, behavior, growth, and reproduction. As food is digested, most molecules work towards generating ATP. Remember, this is the universal energy molecule. Whether we're talking about plants or animals, whether we're talking about bacteria, all the way through those advanced organisms, us. Everything is about ATP. ATP powers cellular work for survival and heat generation. When we talk about non-starving thermogenesis, heat generation right there. For survival, biosynthesis allows for body growth and repair. Synthesis for storage. Synthesis of gametes. So that covers those things we were talking about. Food requirements, behavior, growth, reproduction. Metabolic rate. Sum of all energy required biochemical reactions during a given time interval. Okay, metabolic rate. How much energy you take in, with how much energy you expend. If you have a high caloric diet, just get busy and that'll help keep the weight off. Because what you burn counters what you take in. I like hummingbirds, and I'm sure I've said this in here before. These guys live on almost pure sugar water. And yet, have you ever seen a fat hummingbird? Last time I checked, I've not seen any sitting around with diabetes eating insulin. Their metabolic rates are so high that they immediately convert that into energy. How they just don't live by sugar alone. Have you ever seen a hummingbird just kind of sitting in a field hovering around no flowers whatsoever? Chances are, if you look closely, you might see them in a cloud of gnats or other small flying insects. Their beaks are not only capable of picking nectar out of flowers like this, but of picking off tiny little insects. And that's how they get their protein. So they're not just sugar eaters, sugar drinkers, but they can also utilize other food sources. But still, high metabolic rate requires a high caloric diet, so the calories do not build up in their bodies, do not give them problems, they burn the energy almost instantly. Metabolic rate versus activity. Endothermic metabolic rate is about 10 times greater than ectothermic metabolic rate. You know, I look at something like this, I've not even looked at the exam yet for exam number 4. This would be a type of multiple choice question. If I ask you something like this, when you look at this stuff, don't think, okay, is he going to ask this multiple choice for an answer? No, multiple choice. Endothermic metabolic rate is about 10 times greater than ectothermic metabolic rate. Other factors affecting metabolic rate include age, sex, size, ambient temperatures, food, oxygen availability, and hormonal balance. Yes. It's only 1 o'clock. Age. Have you ever seen older people walking around on a hot day with like a sweater or a jacket on, and you're in like shorts and a t-shirt, and you're still thinking you're overdressed? Sometimes as you get older, your metabolic activity drops off, and so it takes more to stay warm. Sex. It's not the activity of, it's the gender that we're talking about here. Don't get too excited. Female body temperature tends to fluctuate more than males. It has everything to do with the lasting hormonal balance. As the female goes through the 28-day cycle, body temperatures fluctuate. Males, not so much. Size. We've touched on this before. If you're bigger, you're better adapted to cold environments. If you're smaller, you're better adapted to hot environments. So if you're big, living in a hot environment, it might be more difficult for you to maintain constant body temperature, and vice versa. Ambient temperature, what does ambient mean? Nope. Ambient. Thank you. Surroundings. It's whatever the temperature is in the air outside. That's the ambient temperature. Like today, the ambient temperature is supposed to be up around 98 degrees. Okay? That's ambient. So obviously, that's going to affect endothermic and ectothermic activity. What foods you eat? Some foods are higher in energy, others not so much. Oxygen availability. The more oxygen available, the higher the metabolic rate. You start sucking oxygen out of the environment, and you're going to see activity go up. And already mentioned hormonal balance. Ectotherm fish versus the endotherm mammal. So we've got the shark versus the dolphin. Both similar in appearance, living in almost the same habitat. This guy's going to be a little more metabolically active. This guy a little less. So, metabolic rate versus size. Amount of energy to maintain 1 gram of body weight is inversely proportionate to body size. That was something you guys think about over lunch. For instance, it's in italics, you don't have to write it out. 1 gram of mouse requires 20 times more energy than 1 gram of elephant. It's like the old joke, what's going to fall faster, a pound of feathers or a pound of lead? Well, it's 1 pound, they're both going to fall the same rate. Because a pound of feathers is going to be a lot bigger than a pound of lead. Well, that's what we're talking about here. If you take a gram out of a mouse and a gram out of an elephant, equal, the mouse is going to burn more energy than the elephant. However, an entire elephant, because it has a lot more grams than a mouse, is going to use more energy overall. That's your inverse proportionality. And what makes it so different? Why do mice per gram burn more energy? They're smaller, they're faster, but not just zipping around all the time. They've got a shorter lifespan. So their metabolic rate is going to be higher because they've got to get more stuff done in a shorter amount of time. They've got to reach maturity, they've got to reproduce, they've got to reproduce as much as they can in as short a time as possible. Elephants, they don't start reproducing until they get to be about teenagers. And when I say teenagers, I mean like for us too, in their early teens. They have a much longer lifespan. Okay, so they can have the time to take care of things life requires of them in a more orderly fashion. So does that make sense to everybody? The amount of energy to maintain 1 gram of body weight is inversely proportional to body size. If you're itty-bitty, like a mouse, you're going to burn more energy per gram. But if you're bigger like an elephant, even though you burn less energy per gram, you're going to burn more energy overall because you just have way more grams. Think about it. How do you say it? Torpor. Physiological state in which metabolism is low and activity decreases. Enables animals to save energy during difficult conditions. This is kind of like entering a state of semi-suspended animation. The environmental conditions just aren't right. They're too cold, too hot, too dry, not enough food. It's not worth being active like you normally are, so you're going to go in a semi-shutdown state. And that's what torpor is. Physiological state in which metabolism is low and activity decreases. You're conserving your energy because there's not enough resources out there to maintain it. And you'll come back around, you'll reanimate, and then the resources are back. These are bats in torpor. Just kind of hanging out. Upside down. Hanging upside down. In a second, I'm going to take a little time to torpor to illustrate this. So physiological state in which metabolism is low and activity decreases. You shut down. Makes animals save energy during difficult conditions. Acclimatization. Physiological response in which animals adjust to predictable environmental conditions over time. The adjusted amount of insulation, which tends to be seasonal, produce cryoprotectants in the body fluid. What are cryoprotectants? What keeps them from freezing? Cryo means to freeze, protectants, protect from freezing. What they've got antifreeze in their body, it's not antifreeze, it's that kill. Maybe extra sugar in the blood will help keep their blood cells from fracturing if they freeze and thaw. It's kind of hard to tell on this. The Cis frog was frozen here in the forest floor. There must have been a frost or something and iced over, and he's okay with that. He's probably kind of like a bit of a scooper. So, acclimatization, physiological response when animals adjust to predictable environmental conditions over time. So some organisms, like amphibians, can actually produce cryoprotectants in their blood to help keep them from freezing. If they freeze, it'll prevent the blood cells and other body cells from fracturing when they go to thaw again. Adjust amount of insulation. Things like bears will spend a lot of time in the summer and fall especially just eating and eating and eating and whatever they can get, whether it's meat, whether it's veggies, whatever. They're just going to pack on the pounds because they're going to go into a torpor and kind of hibernate throughout most of the winter. And they're going to feed up all that body fat, so it's going to be insulation for them. To help them survive and to help them nourish themselves over this period of time. So hibernation, long-term torpor, adaptation to winter cold and food scarcity. Enables animals to save energy during difficult conditions. Most animals really hibernate for like months on end, from like the first and last process. Usually a period of restlessness, sleep. This is a dormouse hibernating. I believe it's one of the few animals that actually hibernates. So long-term adaptation to winter cold and food scarcity. Enables animals to save energy during difficult conditions. I think it's hard for you guys to appreciate this because you live in a place where basically the two seasons, the hot summer, the cold summer, there's never a need for you to shut down. Maybe in the summer times, you avoid going outside a lot, it's just too hot. You stay in the air conditioning, or you stay at home, or you go to the mall or someplace where there's air conditioning, and you get there with the air conditioning running in your car. So you really never have to do this. I mean, there's times, back east especially this winter, was nasty, where you have sub-freezing temperatures, you don't want to go outside and keep it calm. Not just sub-freezing, sub-zero temperatures. And so you kind of enter a bit of a hibernatory state, you just kind of shut down, reduce a lot of your activity, you don't sleep for months on end. There's days at a time when you just want to avoid going out, you just want to stay in your den, in your home, you just don't want to expose yourself to the elements. The opposite of hibernation is estivation. Long-term torpor, adaptation to summer heat and water scarcity. Adaptation to winter cold and food scarcity. Enables animals to save energy during difficult conditions. So, in a situation like this, I've tried to make the definitions very similar to each other to help you better understand, better learn them. Estivation is when it gets hot outside. Hibernation is when it gets cold outside. Winter cold, food scarcity. Estivation, summer heat, water scarcity. Basically, all the differences. This is a broad estimate. If it gets too hot out, you will find a cool place to hang out, lower the metabolic rate until it cools down and the rains return. Some animals, some amphibians, some fish like the lungfish, can actually secrete coolant to help protect them from desiccation and drying out. You would take that physiological protection step further. And it is A-S-T-I-V-A-T-I-N. You might find it just starting with the letter D, but I think this is the more correct spelling. Peruvian exam. Neglect the A.
Wisconsin?
You're right.
Wisconsin?
Excavator. Yeah. It's rural, and it's a low metabolic rate. It's not hopping around, it's not a computer or anything like that. It's just shutting down to the environment.
Children. It's children.
Sometimes they'll just maybe go to the bottom of the pond and burrow in one day.
It's not close.
But sometimes they'll find a place near the pond, away from it, and go underground and